If we harbor too much stress in our body, it shows in our physical body as well as our mental health. So, like I was saying, with the physical side of things, it can impact your immune system, your adrenals, your stress response, and that can show as persistent tummy issues or anxiety that can be felt in the chest, and being quite prone to illness. Could be one eczema, it's a very big one, asthma as well.
Welcome to All Aboard, where we help parents navigate the ADHD journey. Whether you're at the beginning of this journey asking what now, or you've trodden this path for a while and are wondering what's next, All Aboard ADHD is here for you. We will bring you key information from expert interviews alongside parents sharing their real-life lived experience to help you feel less alone. I'm Claire, and today we'll be talking about ADHD burnout in children and teenagers with our expert guest, Dr Samantha Hiew. Named a difference maker by PBS America, Samantha uses storytelling to inspire change. Sam founded ADHD Girls at the age of 40 after a decade of crisis living with undiagnosed ADHD. She is now a highly sought-after neurodiversity keynote speaker and trainer, working with over 80 FTSE companies to date to foster neuroinclusion and has spoken to more than 100,000 people. With a background in communications and medical science, Sam humanises neurodiversity, bridging the empathy gap between those who are neurodivergent and neurotypical to foster a sense of connection, understanding and belonging. Her work has been featured in Forbes, Psychology Today, Loose Women, Qantas, The Guardian and research features. Welcome aboard, Sam.
Thank you so much for having me, Claire. It's really nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. So burnout, as we're here to talk about, is something that we often think about in adults. And I know I've experienced it as a mum with ADHD, but it feels like it's something that's becoming a kind of growing concern amongst teenagers and children with ADHD too, which I know can seem surprising to some people, but it's almost a kind of overlooked issue. And I thought it's very important for us to understand and recognise kids that are suffering from burnout so that we can help protect them in the long term. And I wanted to start by asking you, what exactly is burnout, and specifically, how can it affect children and teenagers with ADHD?
Burnout is when our nervous system, right, it's fried. And it has a lot to do with our stress response and the way we handle stress, in our day-to-day lives. A lot of neurodivergent individuals, and this begins in childhood, up until adulthood, we have a different way of experiencing the world. So first of all, we are very sensitive to the world. We can develop a hypersensitivity in our senses, and the way, the world can sometimes come at us and it can feel like there's no filter, and burnout can happen as a result of an overwhelming long-term exposure to these stresses, and stress in our lives, we think immediately, it's for children, it's the stress of their social environment going into school. If you can think about neurodivergent children being in school, starting, even to begin with, it can seem like a very alien place, compared to, say, the home or the family, who understands them. They have to put on a layer, that is acceptable. And when they're young, they don't know how to do that. So there is a fear response that is heightened in that. So that's the social and the psychological aspect, which can be a significant amount of stress on their lives. But then as they get older, there's the academic stress, to be able to tune into the classroom and give the teachers and anyone, within the class environment what they need from them. So there's that cognitive stress as well, because it's not that we're not clever, but a lot of the time it's when we struggle to do things in the moment, on demand, that can add to our stress in our lives. And over time, let's not forget also our lifestyle, the way we raise our children nowadays. It can be very tablet heavy. You might have that, thing where they wake up and then they look at the iPad and they watch something, before they even go to school. And then, the same happens then. That also adds a level of imbalances in our neurotransmitters already. So then if you count all that in long term, not taking into account of other things like family environments, whether it's stressful or whether it's protective. All that has a compounding effect that can cause burnout when a child is in long-term chronic stress and they feel like they've not been able to reset and then go again. As you can imagine, there's a lot of interconnected factors that can either protect a child or, render them to be continuously stressed, which would include like sleep. And if they don't sleep well, then, obviously that doesn't reset. And that can, cause a series of burnout in children.
It's really interesting that you started by talking about almost the sensory overload, if that's probably the right way to put it, because our brains are taking in so much sensory information with ADHD all the time, aren't they? We can't filter that out. And so I guess sometimes in children we overlook that that's just the beginning of what their brains are having to process and cope with every single day. And as you say, then you add in the pressures socially as they try to navigate and understand those worlds. And then the expectations in school, that's huge. You described it so beautifully then. I could almost imagine it layering up like brick by brick. And those pictures you used to see in cartoons when we were younger, when like steam comes out the ears, that it's just that absolute, this is cognitive overload. As a child, I just too much now. I can't cope anymore. And I need that reset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I just love, kind of looking at the journey that we take from the moment we come into the world and how I understand our ADHD traits, how that present in adulthood is looking at the path that we've walked, to get there. And if you can think of neurodivergent children, and even any children, and any child, they tend to develop, their movements and then the emotional side. And then the rational brain only really comes online when a child is approaching late adolescence, young adulthood. So before they were even able to make sense of what they're feeling, their nervous system have felt it first. So that's the development of that, the emotional system. And if they're in an environment where it is a lot and they can't make sense of it, there is that heightened anxiety and fear. And that's why so many children with ADHD tend to get diagnosed with anxiety before, they even find ADHD.
Because our brains are processing so much all the time and are just so busy, I think, with that kind of almost chronic overthinking as we process these different thoughts and almost multiple channels that can be going on within our minds at the same time. So in terms of, we've obviously talked about some of the causes and like the layering of the pressures on children without adequate time to reset and how these can kind of build up. But what, in your experience, have you found to be the kind of triggers for burnout? So is it simply that, as we were just describing then, that the world around them and the information they're taking in just becomes too much to be able to continue? Or what typically would trigger it?
I think there is definitely difficult emotions, and how people, children respond to potential criticism and feedback. That is, the response to how they behave, is heard, from either the teacher or their friends, and it's feedback to them. And that can, kind of elicit a rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which can start very, very early. We fear that if we don't do, things that people need from us in the moment, then we might be ostracized, embarrassed, singled out as different. And as a child, all you want to be is the same as everyone.
Yeah. On RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, that you mentioned then, I wonder if, just for people who are listening, in case they don't understand what that is, without going into too much detail, how would you kind of summarize what that means if it's the first time you're hearing it?
Yeah, so it's sensitivity to perceive rejection. Most people have sensitivity to rejection, okay? It doesn't feel nice when someone gives you a feedback or, it comes across looking like criticism, because we are so in tune to how people think about us that it elicits a response that feels like a pain in the body. A lot of autistic ADHDers have that. And it starts very early in life. We didn't just get it in adulthood, because we know quite quickly, when we are welcome, when we're not. And I think, it has a lot to do with our neurobiology, but also that some attachment challenges can make it, more severe.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so highly intuitive. Typically, I find people with ADHD, and therefore that can just be utterly exhausting. I mean, the first time, not that we're here to discuss RSD, but the first time I came across that and I read it, it was a complete light bulb moment for me, because I felt suddenly like I just understood so much of myself, and then actually being able to relate even more so to my children as a result of that. So I guess then, if we think about that layering we were talking about and all of the information our brains are having to cope with, and then you add into that the constant negative feedback that children with ADHD are experiencing, when actually, for the most part, they're usually trying their absolute hardest, which is what I think is so heartbreaking about it, because they're giving everything they can. You often hear from teachers, must try hard, or if only they could just do this, or they can do it here, but they can't do it here. And I think sometimes we forget that kids are really already giving everything. Like, at times there maybe isn't anything else in the pot. So when we start to compound this with everything else, that just, as you said, their nervous system just becomes kind of fried and they can no longer really cope. So what are some of the kind of warning signs or symptoms that we should be on the lookout for burnout as parents, or indeed teachers, if they're listening too? What does it look like?
Things can look like, a child who's not feeling well. Usually they're more clingy, or they're more snappy, or maybe they're not sleeping well, because they can have difficulty to wind down from that overwhelming stress in your body, especially so for ADHDers who are also autistic. We tend to struggle to get rid of stress in our body, and it takes time. I think that's what my son tends to tell me, because when he cries, he doesn't just cry for 1 minute, he cries for a full 10 minutes. I said, why do you cry so long? Because it does get you, right, as a parent yourself. And he's like, it takes time for me, like it doesn't just go. Like, when they start getting stressed, their neurochemistry has an inability to, snap out of it straight away. And so, yeah, it can look like, emotional challenges, but also sleep issues, and, them being more wired and maybe appearing more defiant, because a lot of the stress or burnout can come from relational stress, which is probably harder for children to get over if the parents aren't aware of how that interaction is also compounding that. And a lot of parents tend to come to me when they're girls with ADHD are around 10, 11 years old, and they're like, why do they all of a sudden, start to flip? And they're going through puberty too, the start hormonal fluctuations, and they can be more emotional, cry easily, and, it can come across looking like, wow, all of a sudden there's a switch that's flipped, but that's because there's always a reason for it. Behavior is a form of communication, right? So
yes,
we need to get in tune and understand what that is.
Oh, absolutely. I say that all the time about behavior being communication. I think it's sometimes really easy to forget that. And kids are just amazingly intuitive, aren't they? Like what your son said, that he knows it takes him time. Like, he just knows that. And sometimes perhaps just because, we're busy as parents and we're trying to juggle multiple things, that almost at times, I know I've been guilty of that, you can kind of overlook the information that's there right in front of you. And we had a situation, just thinking about that overload and how it can be almost situational dependent. When we were on holiday this summer with my daughter, we were really fortunate. We went to Paris for the Olympics, which was an amazing experience. But actually, on the first few days, you could see that my daughter was really struggling, that as the day progressed, almost the demand avoidance in her was through the roof, because there's so much going on at a sensory level, so many people. It was very, very hot in the city as well. And actually, it was on the days when we kind of tuned in a little bit more to what was going on, and we built in a small amount of reset in the day for her. And it wasn't necessarily very long. We would go back to the hotel, even if it was just for 20 minutes, and give her that time in her room, because she tends to recharge better by herself with her like noise cancelling headphones on, and gave her that chance to reset, because she's kind of giving us that information. But in that way, it's true of everyday life, isn't it? As a parent, that you're rushing here and you've got this to get done, you've got to be here for this time, that we can kind of really overlook those particular cues, I guess, that they're giving us.
Yeah, absolutely. It is like so many layers, and if you just know what they are, then you can begin to understand it. But actually, I really think the most important thing is to look after you as a parent. I've come to realize that, if I don't look after me, then I can't look after them and I affect them.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no way around it. It's like a co-regulation, or just looking after you, put the oxygen mask on first, as they say.
It does become a vicious circle, doesn't it? Because, I mean, on the subject of burnout, and I mentioned that right at the beginning, I know that probably my first experience of burnout was actually a number of years ago when my son was quite newly diagnosed, and just suddenly realizing at this point I hadn't yet had my diagnosis, right? So you don't even really fully understand yourself, and just feeling that you're absolutely at your capacity in terms of what you can manage. And actually, on that, as I've done more work on myself and given myself that space, I found I've been so much better equipped to then help and support them. Obviously, we're all human. So I definitely am by no means perfect, but I think you're right. If you can put your own oxygen mask on,
Yeah.
it really, really does help. So you were saying it can look like a child being ill, or at times being kind of more defiant or more emotional. How do we then, as parents, kind of pick out and go, okay, maybe this is more than just a difficult day. Maybe this is more than just, that school was a bit full on, or the expectations have been a lot on them. How do we know that maybe this is burnout?
Well, I guess we gotta, see if your child is acting out, to try and see how long has this been going on for. And if this is something that's been going on for a while, then there's something fundamentally, missing, or that they're not getting, to help them reset. And I always go straight back to nutrition, trying to figure out, like, say, are they having the right nutrients, in their body? Because so many children with ADHD have got nutritional deficiencies, like vitamin B12, magnesium, zinc, and iron. These other sort of things can increase, impulsivity, or, mood challenges. And then just go from there. Are their gut, okay? Are they having like more kind of, gut issues that, mental health challenges can cause? Like if they're anxious, they might feel like tummy ache, or they might be more susceptible to bugs and colds and viruses. So yeah, when a child is stressed, then their immune system will be down. Then that affects everything else. It's a knock-on effect on the rest of their lives.
What are some of those knock-on effects then? What about, I'm thinking, kind of mental health or self-esteem, which is obviously such a challenge for children with ADHD anyway, and perhaps even their relationships with their peers? Like, how can burnout impact those areas of their life? Because they're already difficult for them, right?
Yeah, because I guess if they are burnout, then they might have school avoidance, or they might have challenges in their friendship groups. They might feel like just being by themselves. Like you're saying, when your daughter is having sensory overwhelm, she wants to be by herself. And that doesn't necessarily help when you're in school. You might have more, episodes of falling out with your friends, or getting told off by teachers, stuff like that. And your sleep isn't like anchored in, and, you don't feel like eating. So there's a lot of thing, but I guess you can tell by how they're responding to you as well.
Yeah.
Because, most children, they will try and mask everywhere except for at home.
Home.
And yeah, so I mean, definitely different as well in terms of how they act around their mums, and then how they act around their dads. I find that as mums, they tend to come to you to kind of unload a lot more.
You bear the brunt of it a bit more as a mum.
Yeah, you do. And so you better be prepared, when that happens. And like, you better look after yourself too, to be able to take that on. Yeah, and get some help as well. Can't do this all ourselves, because burnout can be physical, emotional, psychological. I'm just thinking, schools have ELSA, emotional literacy support assistant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are counselors, at school that can support their mental health. If they are able to do an activity whilst they talk to the ELSA support person, then it helps them a great deal. I mean, my daughter's school, they have this draw and talk sessions where they use arts, to let the child relax into it, get into flow, and, then they can sort of open up about what's troubling them. Also, some children might have quiet time, if they find school being quite noisy, especially during break time or lunch, then they can, some schools, or you can suggest it, I suppose, they can go into like a room where it's away from all the noise. It's this sort of thing that
that the schools could try. I think the idea of talking and doing something like drawing is such a great idea, because I always find actually it's the moments where you're not engaging eye contact. For me, car journeys are great for that. If I'm alongside my son and he's in the passenger seat and we're not looking at each other, he can open up a lot more about things. And actually, I've even said to him, when I can sense there's something, because he's usually a pretty open book, but if I can sense there's something he's just not sharing, I've said to him, you don't have to look at me, I'll turn my back. And if you something you want to talk about, and that, even that's been really, really successful, just that sense of this is kind of safe, I don't have to have eye contact with you, and then suddenly he'll share something.
yeah, or go for a walk. It lessens the intensity of opening up, right?
Takes the focus off it a little bit, I think, doesn't it, in that sense? And I think I like the idea of doing art. Even if you're sitting colouring in with a child, doesn't even need to be a young child, that can be so therapeutic and a great way just
Yeah.
to kind of connect with someone in that moment. So, I mean, let's say we don't identify burnout and we don't recognise these signs, or we haven't yet. What are the kind of long-term risks if you don't identify burnout, I suppose, in children and young adults, teenagers?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess children would have different types of stress compared to young adults and teenagers. I think research have shown that teenagers and young adults tend to struggle more with psychological and social stress because of their, sort of coming into a new identity, having to figure out and stand for your own. And so the signs, if we harbor too much stress in our body, it shows in our physical body as well as our mental health. So, like I was saying, with the physical side of things, it can impact your immune system, your adrenals, your stress response. And that can, show as persistent tummy issues or, anxiety that can be felt like, in the chest, and being quite prone to illness. Could be one eczema, it's a very big one, asthma as well. So that can, just some examples, because with eczema, also like psychological stress, any kind of stress can make it very hard for the body to reduce inflammation. And also, we may have challenges with reducing toxin load anyway in our body. So, yeah, but then in the mental health side, then obviously depression, anxiety, and depending on what type of stresses they are, and we're talking about children and teenagers, because most children and teenagers, their dopamine reward system comes into play around the age of 11 and 12. And if they're going through stress without the support, they could potentially, depending on their environment, go down the route of self-medicating, and what is socially acceptable. So that can look like substance use to cope with that intensity of everything that's going on. And when we get to a certain age, they start to have access to more substances or things like drinks, cigarette. But now it's so normalized that people use vape now, but it's not good for you, is it? I mean, it probably works the same way as nicotine and cigarettes. And so, yeah, it can come out looking this way. But I suppose we can't blame it all on burnout, but then it's the environment that they're in and what is role model to them. Because I find that because our prefrontal cortex has definitely a delay in the maturation of our prefrontal cortex. In fact, like there was an article in Attitude that quoted that our frontal lobe doesn't fully mature until the age of 35 to 40.
Oh, wow. With people with ADHD because of that developmental delay. Because I think is it on, I mean, I know this is oversimplified, but it's an average of 30%. Is that right?
Something like that. Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting because I think in normal human being anyway, we don't fully develop our mind and our ability to tell what people really mean, like up to a certain age. But I think with ADHD, it's further delayed. We have that decreased ability to rationalize what the situation is, and see for the long haul what our choices is going to do, because in the moment we need that relief. We almost need a wise adult to help be our brain, and if we were lucky to have parents to scaffold us, to a certain extent, up to a certain age, then really then going forward also we need some life skills to be able to, navigate the world and all the choices that we have to make.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? Because, if you think about an ADHD brain, never mind a more immature one that a child or a teenager would have, that we have issues with time as well, right? So everything is now, not now. So how do we make choices? How do we have an understanding of what we're doing now, or how it affects us in the kind of not now that is the future? And I think you're right. It's so much about scaffolding and helping develop those skills to support them as they're kind of growing up and becoming young adults themselves. So if we're perhaps not yet seeing signs of burnout, which would obviously be a very positive thing, how can we then help as parents prevent that? What practical strategies would you recommend, that we could use as parents, maybe even schools as well if they're listening? How can we prevent this from happening?
I mean, I think it's a holistic aspect. Like, it really begins in, by us looking at the different aspects of their lives. When they go to school, do they get adjustments for being that way, for being a very unique way that they sometimes can't help, some understanding? ADHD Embrace has got this amazing 101 reasonable adjustments for children with ADHD, a lot which can be put in place without even a diagnosis if you're able to get the school on board with it, having the ability to, have a role to play in school that, helps them move about, but also protects their self-esteem as well, channel their interests and their strengths to something that's very positive, something that maybe is related to their talent, really builds that self-esteem. But having someone in school who really believes in them, someone who's not your parent, whether it's a coach, a football coach, or someone who recognizes a skill, a talent that you have. Like, for example, some people might be naturally gifted in art or singing, or acting. So if they're able to have activities where they're recognized for it and it boosts their self-esteem, then it helps a great deal. But in terms of navigating burnout, I guess it's to make sure also what their routines are like. Like, children with ADHD really thrive with routines, and to, help them understand what you need to do to get out, on time. Because I know we do a lot for them as parents, but up until a certain age. And then after that, they're kind of expected to know what to do, especially when they get to secondary school. I've heard of ADHDers who get into detention because they forget to bring something. So stuff like that all adds up, right? So it's to put in that routine and structure for them, and then having the non-parental adults in school to support them, but also us as adults, that they can count on, to anchor in their sleep and rest as well, and also how much tablet and access to screen time that they have. And it's hard because I know, I'm so aware as well, like as I'm saying this, that we can easily bring this down to this route where we're like hyper controlling, and we're gonna put all the structure in for them and a routine, and then like no TV and screen, like 3 hours before bed. I think the most important thing is to co-create solutions also with your because you got to parent with what they call love and logic. And I can say this, I know the concept, but sometimes it's very hard for me to do it myself because it depends on where I am with my tank too. If I'm
Yeah.
depleted, like, logic goes out the window and just all stress response. But recognizing that has helped me understand that, gosh, I really need to look after me, especially at my age, because so many of us are having tweens, new adolescents, just as we're going through some changes ourselves, right?
Yes.
Hormonally. So yeah, it's a holistic 360 degrees. all around.
It's all connected, as you said. And I like the idea of co-creating. I think that's true because children have such lack of autonomy, don't they, and control in their lives. And I recorded a podcast, a parent episode with Kirsty Nicole Hadley, and she talked about that with her son, her teenage son, when it came to screen time. So actually trying to involve him in that decision. So instead of sort of saying, right, that's it, 10 minutes and it's off, she would ask him, how much longer do you want to play for? And I've tried that, and the responses are quite pleasing. They're positive. They're surprising in a way, because actually they're not going to turn around. Well, I haven't experienced this anyway, and say all night. It becomes much more of a negotiation, and it's almost like they're a bit more on board with it as well, because they've agreed to it. And I'm not saying it's a fail safe, but I do think you're right, because it is this team effort. Like, we're, as a parent, we're scaffolding and supporting them, and they have to play their part in that too, in a kind of age appropriate way within their cognitive ability. And also, as you said, the trusted adult thing, I think that becomes so much, almost more important at secondary, when suddenly your child is moving around classrooms, dealing with multiple different teachers, some who just they won't gel with, or that won't understand them. And if you've got that one person who you always feel safe with and understood by, then I think that's a really, really great place, just to use the word that you talked about at the beginning of this episode, and that was to reset, because sometimes we just need those moments in an environment where we feel understood, and we can remove the judgment and all the pressures and the layering that comes with those things. And just thinking about parents who might feel then at the other end of this, where they have children who they're listening thinking, I think my child is really burnt out. Perhaps they're a bit older, perhaps they're teenagers. Like, what do they do in that moment? What's their first step to helping support their children, where this isn't kind of a case of prevention? This is much more, right, I need to step in here. What would you suggest?
Yeah, I would say just try and prioritize rest. And they are likely to be, sensory depleted, or maybe even relationally burned out, in a way, because we have to, I guess, get to the root of what it is, that they need. Because sometimes, we are much better at dealing with physical burnout because we have to, but then it's that perpetual relational stress that has no end in sight, especially if our stay is caused by, someone very close to us, that we almost get into a state of depression, don't we? When we don't know how to get out of that. I think talking can help, if we can have a counselor to support them in that instance. But definitely laid on the self-care. If they have totally burnout, then could they have like a day off, from whatever they need to do, or a time, because it takes me about 3 months to get over burnout. I don't know about you, but that's the most severe case, and it just requires me not doing what I do, which is overworking, and then just looking after myself. It really depends what the source of burnout is, because I find the challenge is that when stress is so overwhelming that we cannot come down from it, we can't sleep well, we can't kind of function in a day to day, because it's that loop, it's become a loop. Then we need to do everything we can to be able to have that good sleep and rest. I think that helps reset everything.
Yeah, and I think, just on that note, when you were talking about yourself there, the word that came into my head was permission, because I know that I am really, really bad at giving myself permission to rest, and actually, therefore, I'm not really modeling it either. And I guess subconsciously, without intending to, then that's what my children are observing and what they're seeing. And rest can be very difficult for people with ADHD if we've got very active brains. Certainly, if we try to stop our bodies, then our brains wake up. But I guess maybe it's that we, at times, as well as obviously giving ourselves permission, it's giving our children permission to rest and recognize when they need that.
Yeah. And rest can look very different for all of us, right? It can look like play, for children. It can look like going out for a walk, or doing something fun, that is able to take their minds off things. Going to like do some art or pottery, or or go-kart, anything that suits our interest-based nervous system.
Yeah. So what one piece of advice would you like to leave parents listening to help them feel less alone on this ADHD journey?
Well, I think the heartfelt challenges that I feel from parents is, how do I help my child with ADHD with all their challenges, in the difficult patch when I have ADHD myself? And, I want to say, the reason they have challenges themselves is because they themselves maybe have had some challenges growing up. They've not had positive role modeling and how to do this parenting business, and I think we need to, it sounds really cliche, but really double down on self-compassion, and maybe if you are in a tough place, you're unable to break out of that tough place, or your automatic response is maybe start to take a step back, take a break, rest, and then visualize to yourself an alternate scenario where you view, your children as a gift, you love them, you enjoy time with them. It's almost like you're giving your brain a different narrative and maybe a new pathway down your brain to look at things in a more positive light, so you can, actually enjoy this process, because it is tough, being an ADHD and supporting, having children who may need, very similar support from you, but it's to look after yourself, and think about the way you tackle things. And like you say, it's a mindset change. Know that you also deserve support, and you're not just a support system to other people. That took me a long time to learn that, and I'm still learning.
Yeah, me too. I think a positive mindset and realizing that, you don't need to do this alone. In fact, maybe you can't do it alone, and that we are just continuously learning. And that's ultimately why this podcast exists, actually. It's to help people listening realize that they are not alone, and these are shared experiences that we're going through together. And if we can reframe things, if we can look at it with positivity, not to say that it's certainly not hard, because, oh my God, it's hard. And it can be exhausting and relentless at times, but actually we can start to view this in a different way, and then have a really positive outcome, hopefully for our children and for ourselves too.
Yeah, there is hope yet. We've got to rewrite the narrative and break the cycle.
Absolutely. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your expertise.
Thanks so much, Claire. I feel like it's more of a conversation. It's been really chilled and relaxed. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad. I hope and aim for these things to be very conversational. It's amazing to have your expertise and your insight, and to be able to share that with parents, and for me to have the opportunity, because I am forever learning. Every guest that I get to speak to is a privilege in itself, to share that information with others, but also to help me on this journey too, because I have 2 children with ADHD. I have ADHD myself, so we are always constantly learning and evolving with this as we go too. So thank you.
Oh, thanks so much. You've done an amazing job.
If you'd like to learn more about Sam's work or about burnout in children and teenagers with ADHD, then please do check out our show notes below for more information and a link to her website. Or if you'd like to find out about how I can help support you and your children with personalised ADHD coaching, then please do head to allaboardadhd.com. You can also find me on Instagram at All Aboard ADHD. Most importantly, if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please can you follow and review All Aboard to help other parents find this podcast and welcome them aboard our journey too. Thank you for listening to All Aboard ADHD.